Good evening and welcome to What's Your Story? Have you ever thought about just how precious the gift of sight really is? Do you read newspapers, magazines, books, road signs, and map instructions? Do you drive a car? Can you do your own shopping? Are you dyslexic? Are you blind? How do people with vision loss or sight impairment enjoy the great classics of literature? How do they get the news? Is it possible for blind people to have a favorite magazine, newspaper, etc.? And what about kids with vision impairments or blindness? How do they keep in touch with our fast-paced and changing world? My guest tonight is Diane Weaver-Dunne. She is the Executive Director of CRIS, the Connecticut Radio Information System Incorporated. Her story will help answer those questions tonight. Welcome to the show, Diane.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is part 2 of the 2-part series. I hope people catch the first part, that was getting to know you. Now we've been talking about the nuts and bolts of CRIS and what it is, so let's get right to it. What are the different services that you offer? And please explain that in detail, if you will, because I know the viewing audience would really want to know that.
Sure. So CRIS Radio, our first service for the first 30 years, we broadcast now we broadcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, audio versions of print newspapers and magazines. So we actually record articles in about 50 newspapers and magazines, which is pretty substantial.
I would say so, yes.
We create about 14 and a half hours of new content every day of audio content. And so among those our magazines and some of our more popular programs, we actually record the store shoppers. So for people who cannot read a print newspaper or a print sales flyer, they want to know what's on sale, we record what's on sale at various stores and pharmacies, for example. We also record the obituaries, which is something that a lot of folks, you would not have access to. There's no real audio version. You can't get that on TV. And the other thing that's really unique about CRIS Radio, we record the full articles. So it's not just a headline or the first paragraph. We record articles in depth. For example, the sports. We don't just record the scores. We record the article. And especially sports enthusiasts, they really like the opportunity to hear what happened in the 5th inning or whatever. You know, they want to hear these plays. So we record at length these articles. So that's what CRIS Radio does. And so the other thing that we do is we record classroom materials for kids who have a learning disability. If they have ADHD, dyslexia, they're on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, we provide audio versions of classroom materials for their schools, and they can listen to it as a podcast with an MP3 player or an iPad or on a computer. So that is something that's been very well received. We also stream children's magazines. We were the first radio reading service in the nation to provide an extensive lineup of children's magazines. And this way, kids can read or listen to Sports Illustrated Kids, for example, or Scholastic News. Things, Ranger Rick is another one. There's a number of those award-winning magazines that we provide. And then another program we provide is CRIS en Español, and we provide about 13 Spanish language newspapers and magazines for people with a print disability, but their primary language is Spanish. So, for example, we do Reader's Digest in Spanish. We record National Geographic in Spanish. And it's already translated. We don't translate anything, but we also provide that, and we stream it. And so among one of our services, we stream to St. Francis Hospital, both in English and in Spanish. And the same thing with Mount Sinai Rehabilitation Hospital. We stream both those streams to each patient room. So if somebody wants to listen instead of watching TV, they can turn on a certain channel and they can hear CRIS Radio in either English or switch to a different channel, hear it in Spanish. And then the other thing that we do is we provide talking exhibits for museums, and it's called CRIS Access. And for folks that have some type of print disability, they might not be able to experience the same educational opportunities at a museum because of their reading disability. So what we have done is we use QR codes in smartphones, and folks can scan it with their smartphone, and they can, it immediately triggers the audio of the signage at the exhibit, and it also provides an audio description of what they're seeing, as well as if there's any tactile opportunities. Is there an opportunity to touch and feel at that exhibit? So we are providing a number of different services for people with a print disability.
My goodness. Now, how do you mentioned that you do the school material for kids.
Right.
How did you get involved in that? How did you know that that was a need?
Well, you know, we have about 200 volunteers, and one day we were stuffing envelopes in the conference room for some type of fundraiser, and a retired special education teacher was one of the volunteers who was stuffing the envelopes. And I said, you know, we're doing this new program, we're recording children's magazines. And he said, well, that's great, but you know, it'd be better if you would do custom recordings for teachers, because when I'm doing something on Betsy Ross and I need a chapter on Betsy Ross next week, you know, if there's a student who cannot access that information, it'd be great to have it in an audio version. So that was the impetus of CRIS Kids as far as the classroom for the schools. So now we have an audio library, a CRIS Kids audio library, all on demand, of 1,300 classroom materials because of that one suggestion.
That's really quite amazing.
It is, yeah.
That's really quite amazing. Now, I understand you have several locations throughout the state.
Yes.
Would you please talk about each location and what it does? And,
Sure.
And why is it where it is?
Sure. So CRIS Radio has a state-of-the-art digital, very modern radio station located in Windsor. That is our broadcast center. But we have 5 other regional studios, and they all do pretty much the same thing. CRIS Radio, if you think about it, we're like the network, and these 5 regional studios, they're the local, like a local network that they will interrupt and do their local news. So they will go live, and what we do, we have a program that we go live every morning between 7:30 and 9, and then we start with sports in the morning, and then from 8 to 9 we do local news.
Excuse me, I just want to make sure I understand so the audience gets it too.
Sure.
What is it, I know what live TV is, but what does it mean you go live? Somebody's actually reading at that moment?
Exactly. So in the morning for that 1-hour program, we have 2 anchors who record the front pages of the newspapers, and we call it front pages.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Right, and they read the front pages, for example, in this area, they'll read the Hartford Courant and they'll read the New York Times.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and so we have, in our 5 other studios, let's see if I can get this right, Danbury, Trumbull, West Haven, Norwalk, and Norwich.
Okay.
And they will read, their volunteers there will go in and they will read their morning newspapers while we're reading our local Hartford Courant and New York Times.
That is wonderful.
Right, and then in the afternoon, from 6 to 7, we go live again with the afternoon paper. And so in our area, it would be the Journal-Enquirer.
Okay, I got it. Yeah.
And if those areas do not have a local afternoon paper, what happens is they'll listen to ours. So we do, actually, the Journal-Enquirer and the New Britain Herald, I'm sorry, for the afternoon, the 6 to 7 live program. And we have, so we have 3 folks, volunteers, helping put that program together. And one person is the producer who sits like what the folks are here. They are producing the program, and we're in front of the mic, and we'll have 2 anchors to reading it. Of our producers, 2 of our producers are completely blind. They have no sight at all, and they are still, what I like to think about having them on board is that it features their ability to do what a sighted person can do. So they have to turn on the mics for the anchors when it's the right time for them to record. They hit the PSAs, you know, every 15 minutes we stop and we have a PSA that comes in. They also have to record the weather the weather report, and they have to record it live, and they use Braille. So it's really impressive.
That is impressive. Even when I'm speechless, it's really quite impressive.
It is.
Now, you have told me in my initial interview with you that CRIS was founded in 1978.
That's correct.
Okay, why?
Well, CRIS Radio was a brainchild of a man named Bill Patton.
Okay.
And he headed up, back then it was called the Board of Education and Services for the Blind. And a lot of the clients, and their clients were people in the state who were blind, they reported a lot of sense of isolation, not being in the loop about what was going on because they could not read the newspaper. And they really wanted to have more in-depth news. They wanted to know what the opinion pages were, different things like that. So he thought, well, gee, we really need to get audio versions of the newspaper out to the general public, not to the general public, but to their clients, the people who were blind. So he reached out to Archbishop John Whalen at the time, and they were in charge of WJMJ. And he said, well, maybe we could partner, and if you would donate your subcarrier frequency, we would be able to get volunteers to record the newspaper. And it was, our very first broadcast was actually a year later in 1979. It took them a year to get everything going. And then in 1979, they started broadcasting. The first broadcast was for 2 hours, and it could only be heard in Greater Hartford. And it was just the Hartford Courant. So today, it's 50 newspapers and magazines, and we're statewide.
That's remarkable, really, really. So from that humble background, right? This question is long, so I'm going to read it and make sure I get it right here. Exactly how many people do you currently serve? You mentioned that you went from 4,000 people to 75,000 people. How on earth did you do that?
Well, it's technology.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's really technology. So back in the day, when they started in '79, there was no internet. There was no streaming. And so now we're able to stream CRIS Radio with specialized equipment to hospitals, for example. We're making it available to more than 75,000 people because we can go into assisted living facilities or nursing homes, and we can make it available through internet radios. Even when, until we had internet radios, we could not really serve an assisted living facility or nursing home because the broadcast frequency, that subcarrier frequency, could not get into that building. So now, because of really internet technology, we're able to provide service to so many more folks. Plus, we can provide on demand. So a lot of folks do not want to have to listen and sit by the radio until their program comes on. They want it on demand when they want it, whatever. And so we provide, all of our recordings are made available on demand as well. Not only for the kids. The kids, I don't even know if a lot of the students know what other than sitting in a car, would they really understand the radio, because that was maybe our generation, you know, listening to radio programs. But yeah, so that it's all been because of internet technology and mobile apps, smartphones. So everything is available on the go.
How do you gauge the number of people you serve? Do you have some tracking system, or is it with the number of radios you give out? Or?
Well, in some ways, so the number of individual radios that we give out, we do count those and we track those. So, and we also ask folks if they're listening to Alexa, to CRIS Radio on their hands-free speaker, we ask them to please register with us so we can track it, because our funding is based a lot of times with foundations on how many people we serve.
I was going to get to that next, yes, yeah.
So it's helpful if folks will submit that application to us so we can keep their numbers. But what we do is we don't have like an Arbitron type of system where we can actually count how many ears are listening to CRIS Radio. But what we do have is we know how many people we are making it available to. So for example, if we're at a school and they tell us we have 35 kids or 100 kids in this school district who have special needs, and we're going to make it available to those students. That's how they will tell us the count. We know at a hospital how many patients are discharged. We've made it available to that many folks. So that's the only way we can count it, is how many people we're making it available to.
Diane, it's no secret that money is short and tight.
Yes.
You're a nonprofit. You're probably fighting for every dollar with other nonprofits.
Yes, the competition is fierce.
How are you funded, and what's the story there?
Well, so CRIS Radio is basically funded with donations. Right now, we receive about $20,000 a year from the state. At one time, it was over $100,000, but over the last 4 years, we were cut about 76%. So about half of our funding is from grants. So we apply to a lot of foundations.
So excuse me, so over the last 5 years, you were cut about 76%
That's correct.
of your budget.
Right, and we are the only radio reading service in the state. We are the only folks that do what we do. Well, it's a very unique service. It's been unfortunate.
It must be very challenging being the executive director with that.
It is, but we stay optimistic. We are grateful to the Connecticut Lions Clubs, for example. They donate more than the state does. They collectively, all of these Lions Clubs, they donate about $35,000 to $42,000 a year to CRIS Radio.
Now, tell people what the Lions Club, they have something to do with sight too, do they not, the Lions Club?
Well, part of their mission, they were connected with Helen Keller, and Helen Keller, they took on that as part of their mission to bring sight to people. So they do a lot of vision programs, low vision programs, and they also raise money for CRIS Radio in the state. So they do a number of other things, but they also do that for us.
It's you know, as you've been talking to me this past hour and a half almost, I mean, past 45 minutes, I'm just sitting here thinking about the fact that there was a time when someone who couldn't turn a page or had dyslexia or had sight impairment, they simply could not access the information that was all around them. That's quite an astounding thought just to absorb.
Right. Well, we have an event every year called Dining and Dancing in the Dark, and we ask the attendees to wear blindfolds for at least a portion of their dinner. And folks come back to me and say, oh my gosh, I didn't get it until I put on the blindfold. It is extremely isolating. And, you know, we had we get testimonies all the time from family members. And one daughter of a father who had lost his sight just said that increasingly her dad just kept getting more and more depressed. And she said it wasn't until they found CRIS Radio and they started playing CRIS Radio and he started getting his newspapers back, that he got back in the mix of things and started exchanging conversations with the family. And she said it was the first time she saw him smile for years until he got his CRIS Radio. And that is a common testimony that we hear over and over and over again. It is really transformative for people who cannot read. So, you know, it is a hard job to be an ED and raise that money, but the impact on the lives that we affect, it makes it worth it.
Nonprofit, you take contributions.
We do.
Where would people send contributions, Diane?
Well, they would send it to CRIS Radio at 315 Windsor Avenue in Windsor, Connecticut, 06095, or make it easy. Go to our website, hit our PayPal button, and make a donation that way.
So you can do it on PayPal and
That's
internet.
right. And we have folks that actually donate a small amount every month, which is wonderful.
I'm going to assume it's tax deductible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're a 501c3.
501c3, it's
That's
tax
right.
deductible.
Yeah.
Now, no amount is too small or too large.
Exactly. That's right. I think about a good half of our funding, really, almost about half, it does come from civic groups and individuals. That does support us. And a lot of our listeners make a very small donation each year, but every little bit helps.
You know, this has been fascinating for me. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate and and enjoy your being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really
It really means a lot to me, and I hope the audience can get something from this and that you can benefit from it as an organization.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. Now tell us, who are some of the more famous people who have read at CRIS?
Well, we have a lot of professional voices at CRIS, but not all of them are professional. But for example, Joanne Nesty, who was on NBC Connecticut for many years, like I think 25 years. We have Michael Picozzi from WCCC. We have Nicole Nalapa. She does our pets program. She's on WFSB, and she's going to soon be their morning anchor, actually. And soon to be a mother as well.
Oh, she is?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
She's expecting.
God bless.
But we've had Jim McPherson does, let's see, I think he did Car Talk on WTIC. But Jim is one of our first volunteers, and that's the magic of CRIS Radio.
They come and they stay.
They are our volunteers, they stay, and we have a wait list for volunteers, which is highly unusual for a nonprofit.
Highly unusual, yeah. But you don't have a wait list for money. You still need money.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right.
Any money that people can send.
That's right.
Tell them one more time where to send it and how to do it.
Sure. So it would be CRIS Radio. You can go chrisradio.org and hit the PayPal button, or CRIS Radio, 315 Windsor Avenue in Windsor, Connecticut, 06095.
Now, how do you advertise your services? How do you do what you do?
Well, we do a lot of outreach. So we will go to Lions Clubs, for example, and we will speak at civic groups. We go to senior centers. We provide a lot of outreach at senior centers, assisted living facilities, things like that. But we count on champions like Scott Haney, for example. Scott Haney is a true advocate of CRIS Radio. He talks about CRIS Radio on air quite a bit. We have folks like Scott, who has access to commercial TV. And so Scott talks a lot about CRIS Radio to promote us. But, and we also take advantage of the media. If we have an event, we send in a press release and we let them know of what we do. So.
And when do you have this dinner with a blind?
We have it in April once a year.
Okay.
And then we have a golf outing. We have another fundraiser. Actually, this year it's on Wednesday, October 2nd at Tunxus.
At Tunxus?
Yeah.
So how long are the blindfolds on?
They're on, well, as most people, we ask them to keep on for at least 1 minute, and it's like, they think it's an eternity.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. So let's close out with telling us what your future plans are real quick.
Okay, so our next big project is CRIS Access, and that is for museums. So only 11% of people with a disability visit a museum.
Okay.
Adults with a disability visit a museum.
Okay.
And so we want to change that. So we are creating a new mobile app that will use not only a QR code, but also a GPS longitude and latitude for exterior exhibits or walking trails.
Wow.
And that will trigger audio information, and it will make it accessible for people who are unable to read. So that's our next big project.
All right. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so very much.
Appreciate it.
Wow. That's all the time we have for tonight's show. I want to thank my special guest, Diane Weaver Dunne, for being here with us tonight, sharing with us the history and the story of CRIS. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Good night.